To me, I would think that pursuing democracy at the expense of development of economies is something which is very expensive. It is extremely very expensive because you realize that now we are spending a tune of 2.4 trillion for this coming election just to organize and have people select the leaders. That 2.4 trillion is something like a huge factory which will employ hundreds of people. The other side, when you pursue development in order to achieve democracy, because at the end of the day, development will eventually translate into democracy. Development fulfills three fundamental things of democracy. That is self-esteem, sustenance, and freedoms. Those three are very key in any democratic process. People must make some sort of income to sustain themselves, and when they have that given level of income, they are free. They have that freedom. Usually, well-off people tend to be independent from governments and the decision that the government makes.
Okay, Darius, maybe we shall take it off from there when I come back to you. We have two people, their view of the equilibrium. One saying we shouldn't have held an election, and as you're saying we should have really, she said we shouldn't have held an election. We should have, sorry. And he said we shouldn't have. So I don't know if we shall pursue democracy here, because the good thing is that we have an, is it odd number? Yes, an odd number. Maybe it can be the determinant. Let me cross over to you, Francis. What do you think of the situation now? Because we're talking about an election that is funded by the government, right? We're talking about an election that is really a huge factor to the country and maybe the economy for the next 5 years. Because leave alone the president, we're talking about policymakers who are going to parliament who will shape the future of this country in the next 5 years. Should we have really considered that we need them? So maybe we need to have an election since we need a new set of policymakers. We could have said all together, let's fight this pandemic and we can come back later to the election.
Thank you, Dan. Before I can answer that question, I want to, first, give you a highlight about elections and the economy, and that's what we call political economy. So you're going to realize that for the case of Uganda, when you look at our political economy, politics are bigger than economics, and it shouldn't be like that. It's supposed to be the other way around. But unfortunately, here in Uganda, politics are bigger than. So meaning that whatever is done in this country, politics comes first. So you can't think of postponing. That is out because, first of all, we have terms. So if you postpone, that means that you have extended this term for these people in office, and then, their time will have expired. But of course, the timing of this pandemic also, came at a wrong time when we're actually going for elections. And another thing I want everyone to think about is that not everything works for everyone. What works in this area or in this country might not work in other. So democrats came from, the Western world and came to Africa. You get, even the Western world, they still have issues with democracy themselves. So, but in my view, I can't say that elections should be, postponed. As she has said, the virus is here and might be here for a long time, so you can't wait until when. But still talking about, the relationship between the elections and the economy, because this is a very huge factor. And in fact, this is the biggest problem we have in this country, that politics are bigger than economy, are bigger than economics. So now that we've entered the election season, you've seen there is a lot of violence, the competition is too much, political aspirants are really investing too much, they are getting loans, they are selling their property. Why? Because political positions in this country are the highly or lucrative, paid jobs. It's no longer about serving; it's about a job. And when you hear a typical Ugandan politician, it's about serving themselves. But of course, they will not tell you directly. Only that these days, in fact, they no longer hide it. It's on record. I saw one of the MP, Katolba, who was like, last time you sent me my voters, I really ate. Please send me back this time I'm bringing. Now, that is 1 out of 1,000 who is honest. Because even these politicians, they are about, making their selfish interest, as, national matters, but which is not the case. So why am I saying this? Talking about being highly paid. For example, look at a member of parliament in Uganda. He earns over 30 million, salaries and untaxed allowances. Look at our GDP size is only 28 billion US dollars. Look at the GDP of Spain. It's about 1.4 trillion US dollars. Do you know how much a member of parliament gets the other side? Just around 9 million. Compare the size in GDPs. An MP here earns more than MPs, MPs in Tanzania, even Rwanda, and most of the countries like France and Sweden. And not forgetting even about the size of the parliament, because the size of Uganda's parliament at the moment is at about 426 MPs. And remember, more constituencies have been created. So all that is taxpayers' money. And remember, these politicians don't even want to pay taxes. And another thing I want you to not forget is that even these politicians who are getting small salaries, don't be fooled by that. Because, for example, when you check the president's salary, it's around 2.5. Don't get fooled by that. Don't get fooled by that, because look at the other privilege packages, the allowances. And that is a typical way of a Ugandan politician dodging paying taxes. So you're going to find that, in fact, people are supposed to be paying taxes are not paying taxes. It is just a normal Ugandan who is paying taxes. No wonder why our tax GDP ratio, is the lowest in the region. You have, 14%, you see. So, but still taking you there back to, politics bigger than economics in this country, which is the root cause of these problems, is that we have to look at this. I've given an example of an MP who's earning that 30 million, right? Even a driver of an MP earns more than a graduate, profession in the medics who earns around 940,000. So who runs the economy then? Politicians. Why? Because they are the ones who are earning money. They are the ones with the money. And a country or an economy can be in a danger once it is run, once the economy is run by politicians. Politicians having the money, just know that the economy is heading for. That's why we have other issues, which I think there will be, topics for other episodes. But you cannot avoid looking at that. So the question will be, now that politicians are in charge of the economy, they have the money, and it's wrong. Who is supposed to be having the money? Because politicians we are supposed to be having leaders who are to serve people, not politicians who are to be served. So the question is, who is supposed to be, running the economy? Who is supposed to be having the money? Definitely farmers, yes. Under normal conditions, farmers are supposed to be rich and wealthy people in an economy, which is the opposite here. Look at the academics. Look at the scientists, the medics. Every day they are striking for salary increments. I remember when I was growing up in school, I'm sure you guys were, towards the same time when you were in school, we used to be inspired and encouraged to become scientists because we knew they were the highly paid. But I can imagine students of these days, medics, academics are even strike asking for salary increment. Farmers are the poorest. So most of the students, trust me, they're inspired or they want to be politicians. So when you're trying to, to analyze the political economy of Uganda, you cannot leave those, those two. Most of the students, so trust me. The question is, now we are in, we are in election season. You've seen violence. You've seen people want to be in those crowds. Why? Because they are poor. Just call people and you're going to be giving 200 in 1 minute. Even here in Kampala, you're going to find a big crowd, not minding whether there is corona or not. Because people are poor. Who has the money to give, those, small money? The politicians. These people end up not actually voting for the real issues, but voting for. So when you look at that whole problem, the political economy of this country, it's just a whole cobweb, of issues.
The question, what's your stand? I want us to get clear about your stand about why, if we could have postpone this election, or if we could have really kept on with it like we are keeping on with it?
No, we should go ahead to have elections. Why? We don't want to extend a term. We don't want to extend the term for these ones who are already serving, and Corona is going to be here. The situation is uncertain. No one knows when it is going to be over. So once you extend, you're bringing more issues. I mean, like the opposition have hopes that, when elections come in, they might win and change the things. So it might lead to violation, to another, chaos within the country. So we cannot postpone. We have to have elections. Thank you.
All right, dear viewer, you're still on the equilibrium, and like I promised you from the beginning, we're talking about the politics of this country in this pandemic and the political economy. I don't want to leave out the pandemic or COVID-19 because this is the new normal, and we have to live with this. For a time we don't know for now. It could be years, it could be months, or it could go away tomorrow. God's things maybe. But let's move on from this. Let's move on and continue talking politics, the political economy. Darius, this is for you. We're talking about politicians who spend a lot of money. A lot. When I say a lot, you know what I mean. Because if you really confide in with these politicians, they'll tell you the truth that they're spending a lot of money. And even in the previous elections, they'll tell you that I've spent 1 billion shillings, I've spent 800 million shillings to be able to do what? To be able to get a vote and maybe represent in parliament. Last week we talked about creating aggregate demand. To the viewer there, to anyone who is not an economist, does that mean that will create the aggregate demand? I mean, they're giving us money. They are putting money in the economy. I mean, around in the people. I mean, people are getting money out of these guys. Does that translate to that? We may need to know from you as an economist.
Okay, thank you, Dan, for that question. But before I speak to that question, let me first try to find some point of convergence about elections. Those two panelists are in agreement that we should be having elections. I don't differ much from them, but my concern is...
Have you changed?
My concern is if we don't properly handle those 7 elements of an election, then elections are an empty bag. Because we didn't have a credible register, we ended up having dogs lining up to vote. We had children lining up to vote. And I'm speaking as a veteran voter.
Veteran voter or veteran voter riga?
Okay, I last voted when I was 17. And I've ticked, I may even say I've lost count of them.
How old are you now?
Right now I'm 27. That's 10 years down the road when I since voted. Because being by proximity, because I come from a polling station, our house is just near the polling station, and when there are weather changes, usually when it has rained, they vote.
Your house becomes a polling station.
Yes. And some of the votes end up some of the votes end up swinging within the air, and you find yourself ticking them. By the time I voted, I was in SFA. I was still a teenager. I hadn't reached that official age of voting. But speaking to your question on how elections affect the economy in terms of aggregate demand and so on, true, we can all agree that these pre-election periods, every election year, we experience that violence, that anxiety that the citizens experience. That anxiety has an effect on the economy, because usually economic actors respond to both incentives and bias. And we might say that anxiety is a bias. So in that regard, economic actors respond negatively. They usually switch on what we call the wait and see kind of attitude. Investors tend not to spend money because they want to first wait and see.
Maybe there's, before we go there, we can talk about how the investors maybe can withhold the money. I mean, hold back the money, not to invest. But right now, I'm talking about, yes, there is a campaign period for 2 months, and we have very many guys giving us money. 50,000. I had somewhere like in these NRM primaries, people are getting paid 20,000, 50,000 for a vote. And we had talked about how people maybe needed this money for the purposes of aggregate demand, like we talked last weekend. Do you think that money that is really being let out into the economy, from where the politicians have hoarded it before, do you think it will help that?
I was coming to that, because now investors holding money, that is the supply side, but on the demand side, even individuals or households also tend not to spend as much as they were spending previously. They also want to see how the situation will normalize, regardless of the monies that politicians spend. And of course, that will have multiple effects on the economy. Once we experience a shortfall in supply and also a shortfall in demand, then we experience a slow growth rate in the economy. And one could also argue that investors tend to withdraw money and take it in the nearby economies, in, say, Kenya or Tanzania, where there are no elections. Yes. That also affects the shilling, because in that regard it would imply that our domestic currency, which is the shilling, is not being demanded, and subsequently it will lose value. If you were to make a keen observation, you will see that towards every election year, a shilling loses value. But also because a fall in supply normally tends to exceed a fall in demand, we experience scarcity of some essential commodities, and that would normally lead to an increase in inflation. That is coupled with this other money that they are putting in circulation coming up. Every election year, you also tend to see that inflation rates go up. In 2011, for example, we experienced a hyper or galloping kind of inflation. That is when inflation tends to run away, shooting the roof. It nearly reached 30%. Since then, we have been trying to manage it, and we have considerably done well in managing inflation to now a single digit. But of course, the economic meanings and economic implications may quite differ from the on-ground reality. A single-digit inflation rate may not necessarily mean that prices for goods and services are very low. It simply means that we have experienced stability in the volatility of those prices. So to me, I think splashing of money may not necessarily stipulate aggregate demand in an election year. And by the way, if we...
As you wind up.
If you could see the sectors which tend to do well in election year have been hit most by this pandemic, because they are still in a lockdown. Those are bars. That's where they tend to sort of much of those social problems. And also religion. Religious leaders make quite some good money during elections because politicians are donating to them.
That's the right time they wait for them.
Yes.
Auctions and all that.
Okay. Thank you, Darius. You're still on the equilibrium, yeah, and like I told you, we're going to be helping you understand the political economy of Uganda in this election period, where it is a rare one. I mean, the first of its kind, if I'm right, or maybe the first in very many years, where we're having an electoral process in a pandemic, and that leaves a lot of uncertainty. About what I'm talking about with Darius here about aggregate demand, I may want to chip in Hope about if you think splashing money will help the economy, because these guys, I once talked to a politician who told me they have saved money for 10 years. To do what? To be able to participate in an election and maybe muscle up with the others. So finally, they are to release the money. Will it help the economy? Will it help the aggregate demand?
I think so much money splashed into the economy, people will have so much to spend that they have not planned for, which leads to inflation. For example, if I'm selling salt and I'm the only one with the salt, and the demand is so high for the salt, I'm going to increase the price. Not so, because they can't get it elsewhere. They can only get it with me. Yes, so I think it's going to lead to inflation. Yes, that too much splashing of money.
All right. To you, Francis. We talk of inflation from the other two panelists, Darius and Hope. And now I want to bring it in another angle. He talked of investors in such a season withdrawing the money and taking it away. Then we have these people splashing it. Should anyone there, our viewer, think that can help balance it in terms of inflation?
Thank you, Dan. First of all, Aram also first comment about the inflation. As I said, during elections and actually after elections, inflation always shoots up. Why? Because a lot of money is pumped into circulation. So when there is too much money in circulation, remember this money is not earned. And all viewers out there should know that the money you've not earned is not good for the economy. I mean, we imagine that's why you cannot wake up and print money. You want everyone to be having money. Then it will not make sense. So once you pump this money in the circulation, that's why some people are going to end up foregoing their productive normal activities, and instead they want to be in rallies, running after politicians, looking for the money. So once that earned money is a lot in circulation, as she has said, prices of goods is going to go high because the aggregate demand will shoot, and yet even the supply levels will not have, are raised up. Then taking you to, he has talked to foreigners, they have to take money out of the country. We call that capital outflows. So during elections and, after election, there is that uncertainty that is created, most especially in countries like Uganda, where we have a history of political instabilities, especially after the elections. If you've been reading your history, the president, Museveni, went to the bush immediately after elections results, and he went claiming that elections were rigged. And I'm seeing cases of elections being rigged every day in Uganda. So during elections time, the investors, foreign direct investments, they tend to know, because there's what we call speculation. They speculate anything can happen, and that's true. In Uganda, anything can happen because we've never had that peaceful transition. It has always been through using the use of the gun. So during that time, as has told you that the exchange rate, our currency, depreciates. Why? These foreigners, and remember our manufacturing sector and the service is heavily dominated by foreign direct investments. So what they do, of course, they are not going to go with the Ugandan shilling. No, they want it in dollars. So now they'll be selling the shilling to get dollars and go and invest in other countries. That's why during that time, the foreign direct investments lead to high capital outflows because of that uncertainty. But now the timing is even worse for Uganda because we have the pandemic at the same time also going for elections. So far, we've seen foreign direct investments revenues dropping by 40%, just because of the pandemic. Now, when you put in elections, they are going to even to decline more than, bigger than that, bigger than 40%. Then the other sector you have to look at is the tourism sector. I understand the airport is going to be opened. So as we are opening, getting out of the lockdown, you would want to see, getting tourism revenues, because remember that is another major source of government's revenue. And so far, because of the pandemic, we've seen that we've lost tourism revenues by over 70%. because of that uncertainty or the violence or any, a possibility of any political, breakout, those tourists are not going to come because they know, wait, Uganda, there are elections going on. There's always violence. There is always tear gas everywhere. You get what I mean? And anything, anytime can happen. You're going to declare results. Dr. Chiza is going to say, no, I won, and now I'm a president of the people's government. He's you remember what happened. You have that kind of, so you might think this is not sensitive, but a foreigner, it is very sensitive. That's why before these tourists want to go to a country, they first make their research. So when they see such indicators, it will repel them away. So when we talk of political economy, the politics in this country affect too much to our economy. Thank you.
Yes, you're still on the equilibrium, and to remind you, my name is Dan Ayevali, and I have amazing economists on my panel today who are diving into the political economy of this country in this COVID-19 era. To move on from that, we have a case of politicians who actually pump in money in this campaign. When they pump in money, like you guys said, it is like an investment nowadays, because someone pumps in the money knowing that I will recoup this money, I will get out this money at the end of the day. So at the end of the day, I want to know if you all agree with me that the money involved determines the quality of the policymakers we get. Because Dan, who hasn't any idea about policy making or who has no new ideas or anything about policy making, will buy myself into parliament. And when I buy myself into parliament, I'm one of the policy makers. One by one, we have policy makers who have bought their way into parliament. If we could really dive into that, do you think that notion, that belief is right, that within the 5 years to come, if that is the flow of the things, if you know that there is someone who is buying themselves into parliament, 2 people, 3 people, 100 people, like 300 MPs, you have people in parliament who are just seated to wait for their allowances. And then you have economic policies to be discussed. Is that notion supposed to be believed in, that can work in that circle, that you buy yourself into parliament, you reach parliament, you sit, you won't help the people, discussing the economic policies in this economic perspective, and then that will be the effect of it all. I'm trying to see what it means for the viewer out there, the person watching us, what it means for you to allow to be given money to vote for someone. Does that really bring it out like that at the end of the day? Do you think so, or do you believe it is different, or it is not that way?
Thank you, Dan, for that question. I think Francis hint about it. To me, I think it is largely due to a shift in conventional thinking about politics or leadership in general. We have now tended to buy an idea that joining politics is a monetary reward scheme. Yet, conventionally or ideally, the essence of joining public sector is to build a reputation. It is a career concern, to build a reputation and serve the people, depending on their interests. And I think, given the fact that politicians are spending a lot of money in politics, it also increases the stakes, most especially in the NRM primaries. By the way, we should be putting much focus on NRM primaries than the general elections, because once they are the most recent. They are the most risky, given its dominance. Yes, they are the most recent, but also they are very risky. The stakes are very high in those NRM primaries.
Please qualify that statement. What do you mean there?
Yes, given its dominance, winning NRM primary, you're just steps away
to the main seat.
To the main seat.
That's the perception.
Yeah?
That's the perception.
No, it's not.
Let's cross over for a minute. What do you think about that, and then we cross over this side again? about we're talking politics and economy. So let's talk politics now. Is it just a perception or it is what it is?
Okay, it is a perception, and to a bigger extent is actually right, because there is a belief that if you happen to go through the so-called Akamif of NRM, that you're likely to win. Why? To win the general elections. Because remember, once you flag bear, the party is going to fund you. And this is a ruling, party, so they have the monies. You get the point?
So to a larger extent, you buy that.
Yeah, I buy that.
Okay.
Yeah, thank you.
Let's talk to the yellow. I knew this time would come, and then this time talking NRM. Do you think that is what it is, that those people in NRM, if you're in NRM and you win the primaries, it is as good as that? So if we are discussing this, the reason why we're going into that question is to know if NRM primaries really mean a lot to the final decision of the people. I mean, is it what you think as well, that if you win the NRM primaries, you're as good as in parliament?
No, it's not a must. Some people are actually loved, even when they're in NRM, even without the money. But the problem is actually not the leaders we vote, it's us who allow to be bribed. Because if you take in money and then you vote a leader who sleeps in parliament, then whose problem is it? You're killing the economy. We are the ones killing the economy. Because if we take bribe, we take money. That money, they're going to give you 50,000. You spend it in one day or a week, but the leader is going to be there for the next 5 years. So who do you blame? The leader you voted, or yourself who voted after being bribed?
We go back to what we were talking about. You can continue and we continue.
Yes, true. I was telling you that when you win the NRM primary, you're just steps away to getting the general election. Given the dominance of NRM, given the funds they have, and also given some kind of protection that you get. Because you know why I'm opposed to elections, periodic elections or process democracy. We haven't fulfilled two preconditions for process democracy to thrive. One is that for democracy to thrive, we must recognize opposition as legitimate. But in our context,
who hasn't? I mean, haven't the government really recognized the opposition?
There is anecdotal evidence. By observation, you can tell that to be in opposition is something illegitimate, because you will not be allowed to move. Yes.
You're close to be termed as a criminal or something.
True.
Actually, it's not only legitimate, but unlawful.
Okay. Let me have this conversation. And we are talking about the flow of the money and what that impact means long term to the voter. I have this maybe notion in my head. You as an economist, you could really confirm it or maybe say that it's wrong. You come and bribe me, I'm repeating this, you come and bribe me with 10,000 shillings. Well, you bribe all my kinsmen, I mean you bribe the whole village and we vote you in parliament. Forget the money you eat, what they call kudia, forget all that, but now we're focusing about policy making. I'm thinking this comes with a cost of maybe sending people who are not qualified enough to discuss policies, of which there are economic policies as well involved. So is that notion something, is it a school of thought you can buy, that in the long run it really comes into that?
If I get you done, that concept, ideally, it is very wrong. Because the kind of leaders that we get will eventually affect the policy outcomes that we are going to get.
Exactly my point.
And if you're saying that people are bribing others, I will refer you to what I spoke previously, that now it is a monetary reward kind of scheme. Yet, ideally, people should be going into public sector, into government to make those good policies. So if I've invested 10 billion per se, then at the end of the day, I also want to recoup that money.
I get you. But then we have the money side of it. I will cross over shortly. I know that we've really put the conversation one-sided, but I want to agree or disagree. I want to know where we stand. There is the money side of it. There is the competence of the person who has bought you. So let's talk about the competence of the person to sit in parliament and really discuss policies which can really come out impactful. I don't know if you get my point very well.
I get your point, but the whole point is people are not going to parliament to make policies. It is a monetary reward scheme. They are going there to get money.
Okay, let me throw it this other side. What do you think about our discussion you're having with Darius? Because we're talking about a flow of money, where you bribe me. It is something like a process, something systemic. You bribe me, I let you go to parliament. We all know about the huge salaries that comes with being a member of parliament. But now I want us to examine the competency of discussing policies and maybe, yes, of which there are the economic policies as well, which we're talking about the equilibrium as an economics platform. What do you think about that?
I think, yeah, it affects the quality of those that go to parliament. Because if someone buys their way and they can't talk, they can't address themselves, there are parliamentarians who have never said a word in parliament. You get? So they will just sit there. They don't hear the voices of the people in their constituency. So it affects. At the end of the day, it's negative. So your views are not passed on in parliament because your MP is quiet, he's always sleeping or dozing just because he paid you. So it affects the outcome.
Okay. Dear viewer, we are still on this, so we shall talk to Francis as well, because we want to know what this money we pick, the 10,000, 20,000, what it means, if it will come back to us, or if we can eat the money and then go away with it and it will never affect us. Let's go to you, Francis.
Thank you. First of all, still talking about that money. Things are not the way they are supposed to be. I will tell you the right word to use that statement is that everything is upside down. We are having elections in the names of democracy. Democracy isn't bad, but in Uganda we are misusing it. So you want to have leaders to serve the people, to take the public's interest first before their self-interests. So, but now, because, our society, we have misused democracy, and now elections or political positions are looked at as, like they are positions of, high reputation, and at the same time, they are investments. That's why political aspirants are doing everything, including going even to money lenders. You find someone is taking, a loan at more than 50%. What kind of business venture are you going to know? But they know with elections, once you put in money, now it's time to what? It's time to eat. But don't even forget that even these voters, because of the society, which has been actually worked on for a long period of time, people are poor. People are very poor. That's why, Dan, if you go there, let's say on Kampala Road, and you're like, I'm a politician, I'm giving out 200,000. Just within a minute, you're going to see big and a huge crowd. These are people. I mean, you can say 200 is even too much. But remember, these are people who are supposed to be into productive activities like farming. And when you go up country in the villages, it is even worse. So now, because we've progressively and steadily created this kind of environment and situation, even the voters themselves, they be like, we can't wait for elections to come back because we're going to be getting free money. You get? So if you're a political aspirant, you've sold your property, you've gotten a loan at that high interest rate, what's going to happen? You go to the parliament, we keep on, like you're there to collect. That's why, as I told you, that some political aspirants, they have come out, they no longer even hide it. They're like, let's go and eat. You must have seen different posters in different local languages saying that the other time you didn't send me, please send me, I also go and eat and have some. And this will take us to where we are right now, that politicians are in charge of this economy. everyone is trying to have that share of the national cake. But the question is, do we even still have that national cake? Or we are now fighting for crumbs? Trust me, we don't have a national cake. Just look at this country's national debt. It's going to take us about 120 years to pay this debt. That is if we stop borrowing today. But we've not stopped.
And on average, every Ugandan is indebted by 1 million.
Exactly. So do you see what that means? That our economy is actually, it's on a life, it's on a saving line. It's at the edge. We are not running on debts. But debit will be another topic for another day. Thank you.
Okay. Before I leave this politician issue, I want us to finish it at once and go to another subtopic of this topic you're on about politics in the political economy. I want to know from you, my dear panelists, if we shall go to the recommendations later about what we think that can be done, but maybe if we are talking about the money being injected in politics, is it wise enough to say, make the political posts less lucrative so that we can see less money being injected in it? And maybe, like, I'm insisting on the process, the whole process of which people are going to parliament. How have they gone there? They have bribed their way there, maybe. They want to get that money back. That's one. Two, they want maybe to, two, the quality of the policy-making ability, leave the quality aside, the policy-making ability is lacking because ideally, I don't even know know about what the word policy means, but I have the money. So what if we say, let's make this parliament, for example, or the councils less lucrative? If we say, let these MPs have 2 million salary, no allowances, could that help this whole ruckus we are in?
Dan, absolutely right. And not only should we reduce the salaries of these politicians, we should also be thinking about reducing the size of government. Government is growing like a monster, while the revenues to keep it running are growing very slowly. So, like we said, we need to change that perception and take it back to the conventional way of thinking, that people should join politics mainly to build their reputation and serve the interests of people, rather than looking at it as a monetary reward scheme. And I think that splashing of money, which ideally started around the 2006 elections.
Has been here time immemorial.
Okay, we would say 2006 set a mark to be at an increasing rate. It begets the kind of intimidation that we get, the kind of violence that we get in those elections, because the stakes are too high. On average, a politician earns 10 times more than an average Ugandan. So why not splash that money and get into government, keep quiet and recoup your money back without saying anything?
Maybe we are not the first people to make this recommendation, and I would cross over and ask, not the same question, but is it really possible? We've talked about maybe cutting the salary. We've talked about resizing the parliament or the, let's say, KCCA. We want to know how possible this is, because I can guarantee you that we are not the first people to say that this maybe salary of MPs needs to be reduced, maybe this parliament needs to be resized. What's the possibility? What do you think are the possibilities? Why hasn't it happened over the years when our forefathers or maybe our elders have said this over and over again?
I think it's hard because the ones who get in there, yes, are the ones who decide they're the policy makers. You get? So they debate, and they're like, nay, nay. Everyone will say no. Yes. So it's hard. It will be hard. It will be hard because there's the policy makers. They're the ones who decide how much they're paid. So if they say no, the majority vote is no, then you can't change anything. So it's difficult.
So, Francis, should we forget about that? Like she says, they are the people, the policymakers, and they're the people to decide if they will be resized. Like you're deciding how much you're going to get paid. Which other possibilities can be really tried? I mean, which other possibilities can we explore?
Thank you, Dan. First of all, we have to first recognize that our economy is off track at the moment. And we are saying that one of the major causes is because of the political system we have in Uganda, or the political environment. So I will tell you this, that because remember, these politicians are the decision makers. They are the policy makers, like MPs. But don't just only look at MPs, look even at other political positions. At all, different levels, these are decision makers. You get? So we need to make, a real fundamental change by action, not by promise or giving hopes. So how can we attract these real leaders who want to serve people? They may not have money, but they have good ideas. How can we attract them? Because the environment we are in right now is that it's not about having good ideas. In fact, it's about either having money or being aggressive, like you can make too much noise. You get? You're telling people, we have this, you have this problem, we have this problem, but you're not telling them how you're going to solve them. Or you're just, if you promise them, you're just telling them you're going to build, bridges where there is no river. You get? So if you attract real leaders who are going to serve people, not just their selfish interests, first of all, make these political positions not lucrative in terms of salaries and allowances attached to them. Thank you.
Maybe before I get to you, I would want, it talks about going to the different levels of this government, right from the president and even the local councils. The reason I'm insisting about the whole process, maybe if I could share, is that I, for one, knows, a council of a certain district, or let's say, yes, a district, where you find councillors who can't really even read minutes in English. That means ideally they just sign the minutes. That happens. That for a fact I know. So, that's why I was insisting on what the process means for you to vote someone because they have given you money, but they can't really even interpret, even if they know English, but they can't interpret minutes in council. So you see where I was coming from. I think you see where I was coming from there.
I wanted to speak about the question you raised. To me, I don't think we have lost hope. I think that decision can also depend on the goodwill of the president. Because even when politicians make these policies, the president has to assent to them. In a country like Uganda, I don't think we need a cabinet of 80 ministers and that size of parliament, which is about 426 MPs. However, what I observe, or even what experience has told us, leaders often don't build big governments for the sake of building them. They build big governments for a purpose. They always want to create a dictatorship of boredom, such that you bore people and govern them for quite a long time. Because when government is huge, it becomes indecisive in terms of making policies. And if you were to make that observation, ever since our parliament started growing big, the number of days to amend policies have been increasing. It now takes longer for a bill to be passed as compared to before when the parliament was small. So I think it lies on the decision of the president. Much as signs indicate that he's not willing to do such.
Do you think he's also trapped? I mean, his arms are tied.
Mm, not necessarily so, but one would relate it to maybe insatiable appetite for power, if I may say. But I mean,
He needs these people. These people, he will. You cut the wings of people you need. You know what it means.
I absolutely get your point. You need these people, but again, as the fountain of honor, you also need to take a decision that will benefit the biggest percentage of the population.
All right. The equilibrium is where you're on, and this is the second episode of this amazing show where we discuss economics and let you understand what every other decision or other economic policy affects you, how the economy works, and how you can really fit in this economy in Uganda. We shall not discuss Ugandan economics only in future. We shall be having a discussion about other economies in relation to our own economy, of course, but this will not limit us to only Uganda. And of course, it will be the equilibrium as always. Before maybe we go to our last remarks or our recommendations, I want us to dive in our last maybe question right here. This is a YouTube channel, for example. For everyone watching on YouTube, thank you very much for watching. I go to the point that hurts me as a YouTube person, or maybe a person who really operates online. Recently, there came a directive, should I call it that, or maybe a proposal to have every person or every organization or every account that is really broadcasting live like we are right now to be taxed or maybe, of course, to be charged for their services. And we can't hide it from the fact that, or we can't really hide from the fact that this may be a political move in some way or the other one, because very many YouTube channels, very many Facebook channels, maybe Twitter and what have you have really contributed a lot in shaping the political space of this country in such a season. So one wonders, why this time? Do you think it is a political move? Do you think it's a political move? Let me start with you, Hope.
I wouldn't say so, because as you know, taxes help in increasing the money in the economy. It's another way of increasing money. Yes. So I would want to take that perspective that they just want to increase money, not political, as say.
So you may realize I don't have the stats of head, and maybe the stats on off head, but very many online portals, very many online streaming platforms are ideally opposition based. That's where I'm coming from. You would see the likes of Ghetto TV, you would see very many people. And you would think the government in power, or maybe the ruling NRM, may want to use this as a chance to cut these other people's wings. Because of recent, maybe due to the lockdown, the online audience has really increased. What do you think, Francis?
That's a very good question. But before, that's a very good question. But before we go there, there is one point I want to first make. Allow me to take you behind a little bit. Still about these elections, I'm talking about, let's say, these current elections of NRM. Remember those who fail through these NRM primaries. In the future, they are promised or given actually positions. Whatever position they will be given, or office jobs, they are not getting it on merit just because of their political affiliation. That's why you have a big parade of LDCs, and other different, positions, which will, of course, lead to poor output or inefficient output. Now, going to your question, I don't think that these all online data providers are opposition. I think that is just a bias, and even that's why the government is actually, it's trying to victimize everyone, but targeting those who are on opposition side. Just like the way you remember how OTT came in, because some people from opposition were coming out to attack the government, and we ended up all paying OTT, even including students. The same thing is going to happen with these online providers. So I will tell you this. that this is bad for the economy. First of all, we are trying to shift into the digital economy where we should be embracing all these, new technologies, embrace IT. So before I look at the opposition, it's now a new trend. Young people are coming up with all kind of, inventions, coming up with acting and all that. They put it online. They are earning a lot of money from YouTube and other social media, platforms. So the government coming now, ask yourself about the timing. We are in elections, the timing. So that's why this is a political move, but it's going to even end up victimizing even the other innocent people who are really doing, a genuine work, not even to do with opposition. You get? Mm-hmm. So it's a long thing, because what the government should be doing right now is actually to avail the digital or the IT infrastructure. First of all, that is already now expensive. And now you're going to make these people pay taxes. Someone has just opened his YouTube account. He's maybe, acting some comedy skits, and he wants to earn money from YouTube. When you tax all of them, because you cannot select, they won't be selective. Mm. So, as you have said, taxes are very good. As an economist, I want to pay tax. But I want to see the value of that tax, because it's the only source of revenue to the government. So the problem is not about the tax. But if I'm saying that we are paying tax, there are those who are paying, there are those who are not paying. Or even the little we pay in form of tax, it's not being maximized very well. So that's where the problem comes in. And you don't have to tax everything, because once you tax certain sectors, they won't come up. So you need to think about it very carefully and sensitively. Thank you.
The equilibrium, right where we are, and still taking you through this. Darius, about the online portals, taxing them, and talking about the timing, it being a political season. Does this come as a coincidence, or there is something behind?
Thank you, Dan. Whether political or not, to me, I think government is an individual with two hands, sort of an individual with two hands, one that gives and one that takes away. And that process of giving and taking away is embedded within a social contract. Ideally, as a person, if I pay my tax, I want you in return to provide social services or other amenities that I may need. I don't think we would be complaining about the taxes if government was abiding to that social contract that it has with us. We pay quite some substantial amount of money, but the services we get back are not the kind of services that we should be getting. And speaking to that, I also think that we need a conversation around how government should, mobilize resources, because they need resources to spend if they are to provide these social services. But the bigger question is on what tax rate or a tax that is favorable to the citizenry. That's where always the hottest debate is. Speaking to OTT, I think even if it was a genuine move to tax people, usually direct taxes attract some resentment from the public. It should be formulated in such a way that when people are paying it, they shouldn't feel the impact. But going to the area of ICT and digitalization, like you say, it is still a new or virgin area that we haven't taken keen interest in. And I think if we are to improve on virgin areas or new areas, often the better way is not to begin by taxing. it should be through incentives. First, put some incentives that will attract most people into that area, such that you have a broad sector. You have so many people are within that sector, and later you can tax. Then you will be able to recruit or to get more taxes, as opposed to when you tax when it is still virgin. Of course, I told you people will always respond to biases. It is a bias to new entrants, and they always walk away. At the end of the day, you remain with a small category of people within that area, and you will not be able to collect much money, much taxes.
Maybe, thank you very much, Darius. Maybe we're not seeing it in another angle, which I'm thinking, it just popped up in my mind. These online platforms have really given this mainstream media a run for their money. And you may think, certain times people are like, what's the ownership of these media houses? Some media houses, for sure, we're not sure who owns them. And some people maybe, for a rumor that I won't really go into very much. But you would think, is it a case of influence from the mainstream media who feel the pressure from these online platforms? Because for a fact, if you could check out YouTube videos nowadays, they have very many views, and you would think people with time will be into these online platforms more than the mainstream platforms. Let me have Francis comment on this. Do you think that could be the possibility as well?
Thank you, Dan. I don't think that is the reason, because even the mainstream media, they are not limited. They can also be on those platforms. What matters is that what is the output, the content you're putting there. Maybe these, those who are just upcoming, maybe they have known, they have read the customers, mind what they want. So I don't think it is this mainstream media, no. And another thing, before I let this go, is that just as Darius has said, these are upcoming new ventures, and actually creating their source of jobs, especially to the population. So instead of the government embracing this by giving incentives, let's say in form of cheap data, you see, instead the government is doing the opposite. Now, if let's say the government, let's say the opposition, and those who are using, let's say who are breaking, let's say the cyber rules and all that, the government can always regulate. That's its role. It can always come and regulate. Those who are putting, wrong information, misinformation, the government can always, regulate them. But when you say you're going to tax everyone, that means that you've just panicked. And I look at this like I'm looking at UCC, or the government in a panic mode, just looking at the opposition, using these platforms. You get? Remember, even if you charge them like, a lot in form of taxes, still they will pay and attack you. But you have to look this at a bigger picture, the entire economy. This is a source of job creation. And I'm happy that actually the population, especially the youth population, they're embracing this. But if the government comes and starts to tax everyone, they are now killing these kind of sources of employment opportunities. And when we talk of opportunities, employment in this country. So the government should not just panic and attack and just, put regulations or laws. You get my point? Thank you.
Before I leave the microphone, you could have a comment from you about that, about it being a move from these TV stations, radio stations, who feel there are online radios coming up, there are maybe online TVs, YouTube channels growing, and they could pose a threat to their dominance, which has been there for a very long time. So do you think it could be that way? Maybe it is not a political move?
I say no, because when you what do they call it? They also have platforms on YouTube. For example, when I miss news, I'll go to the NBS YouTube channel and watch. So I don't think it's from them. Yes.
Okay. Dear viewer, in Uganda, Turaba, thank you for watching us right from the beginning. And we are soon winding up. This is The Equilibrium, your number one economic show. I mean, when I say economic show, I don't mean anything but something that we do by discussing the economics of this world and Uganda in particular, or maybe majorly, and also relate other sectors with the economy, how it runs, and how you as a person can better understand this and understand how the economy works. And every week we do this, and I host, different economists on this platform, The Equilibrium, who give you perspective of what's going on in the economy side and relating it with real life and what is going on in general. Before maybe we can wind up, I could have one or two comments from either of my panelists, and then we can call it a day. Let me start with you, Darius.
Comment on anything?
Yes, and on the economy, on the political economy of the country, on the topic we've been on today. What are your recommendations? Start with a recommendation of what could be done maybe to have a better environment, political environment in this economy. And then, yes, you said it set from there.
Like I said, to me, I think going forward, we need to work on the other 7 elements of elections if they are to have any meaning in the future. And by doing so, we will be able to graduate democracy from process democracy to principled democracy. In principled democracy, that's where now the majority rule is protected by an independent judiciary, by a competitive political environment, and generally the rule of law. But like I said, there are 2 preconditions that we must fulfill if we are to achieve that. First, we need to consider opposition as legitimate. That will mean, government getting into its pockets to fund some of the opposition activities and giving it a neutral ground like those in the ruling party. Then the second issue is that opposition should also have external access to wealth and income besides from government. And those 2 preconditions are interlinked. The moment government considers opposition illegitimate, then it also becomes hard to allow it to get external sources of wealth. And there always going to be such kind of intimidation or violence. The second approach that we could take, because that first approach is expensive, and like those who argue that we need elections, it will take us centuries for us to observe principled democracy if we are to tackle it from that way. The other approach is to abandon elections and pursue development policies which would later translate into democracy, because there are about 4 channels through which development can translate into democracy. The first channel is modernization, that once people start earning some kind of money, then it satisfies the fundamentals of democracy: sustenance, freedoms, and self-esteem. The second is neo-modernization, that now people can be able to group themselves. We get labor unions, we get women groups, among others. Then there is also the structural approach. It is also a channel, because now we will be able to build what students of history call a bourgeoisie class, that is an independent business category of people, or generally middle class, that are independent from the state. So the country should be driven by private sector.
So before I leave you, from the start of the show, you said you don't think we need an election. That remains your stand.
And if I'm
Briefly, it says or no, it remains a stand.
it remains my stand. And if I'm to give you evidence, by the way, every other election year, we experience a decline in growth of the economy. And the prediction is that the moment we go to an election, there is 60% chance that we are going to have a decline in GDP, compared to the non-election years where the chance that we are going to have a fall, to register a fall in growth, is about 40%. Meaning that for every 10 elections that we are going to have in the future, 6 of them will cause a decline in growth.
Okay. Darius talks about having the private sector running the government. I will need to be schooled about that because I'm imagining people.
The big private sector.
I'm imagining putting adverts in the newspapers, and you send bids to run the government. All right, let's continue, and I'll have the lead last. Francis, as you give your final comments and your recommendations, I want you also to comment about the situation of tourism. We're talking about, recently we talked about opening of the airports, and right now we have, ideally, or maybe we are envisioning something like investors where tourists are also part of the investors, right? We have those tourists coming in, but there is this scare from the from the electoral period, the political period, and also the lockdown from the COVID. So there are two things which mean ideally few or no tourists will come around. What does that mean for this economy in this period? And then you can dive in into your recommendations and your final remarks.
Thank you, Dan. First of all, as I said that, initially I said that the timing of this pandemic for Uganda was actually very wrong because we're actually going for elections. So on the tourism sector, the revenues will keep on dropping because now we are into an active, election season. However much they open the airport, still, most of the tourists who would want, to visit Uganda won't be coming. The same thing with foreign direct investments. The elections in Uganda create that uncertainty. As I said, that when you look at this country's history, we've never had peaceful transition of government. President Museveni himself went immediately after elections to the bush, immediately after elections. So still, that people always, they always want to make, a background, follow up and see how this economy of this country. So that one, we can't find a solution for now. But to come to my recommendations, my recommendations are, if you're to have that equilibrium between politics and economics, yes, like we want to balance them. Just as Darius has put it, that the economy should be run by the private sector. Yes, that is true. Once politicians are in charge, then things are upside down. So the economy should be in the hands of the private sector. Here we are looking at farmers, who are supposed to be the richest or even the wealthiest in the economy. You're looking at the academics, you're looking at the medics, you get, not politicians. So the question is, how do we make these politicians not, interchange the equation? First of all, we are saying the political positions are very attractive as far as money is concerned. So they have taken them as monetary positions, like a business, like a venture. So how do you attract? You have to come up with, solutions or policies which will attract people who are here to serve, not to be served. To do that, you need to reduce the amount of money attached to these political positions, either in form of salaries or allowances. If you do that, automatically, people will not find it as a lucrative venture. You're going to be seeing, even if you say, like, if you wanted to be an MP, you're not going to be paid. Even if the government passed that today, trust me, you're going to get Ugandans who want to be MPs when there's even no salary. You get the point? But once we still attach a lot of money to these positions, we'll always get those investors, call them political investors, and that's where the problem starts. Because remember, these political positions, they are very sensitive. The roles they play, they are decision makers. So once you don't attract people who are going to come and play these roles, then there's going to be a problem. In fact, if you ask most of these MPs, you've said some of them even can't read the minutes. If you ask most of these MPs, maybe we should do, Darius, we should do this research, and investigative research. Ask these MPs their roles. Do they know their roles? These are policy makers. Because for us technocrats, you just design a policy, but you're not the one to pass it. It's these politicians, political leaders. That's how sensitive and important these positions are. But we can't get rid of them. All we need to do is to detach that monetary value to these political positions. Trust me, say no salary. Some people are going to volunteer, and they will do a good job. No, some people want to lead. They want to serve people. It's not about money. But in this political environment, trust me, those ones are submerged. They are suffocated. You can't even come up. Thank you.
Yes, as you pass it to me, let me pass it over to you back. Madam, I see your hope. Manzi, right? Yes. And let me have your final comments and your recommendations for the future of the political economy in such a season where we are having elections soon in 2021. Yeah, let's have your word.
My last remark is people should know that the government is a body, it's not one person. So it has the people we vote. So if you vote badly, you get bad quality leaders. If you vote well, you get good quality leaders. Look at their manifestos, look at what they're offering on the table, regardless of their political affiliations, and then decide to vote. Because when you sell your vote for 10,000 shillings, you're going to have that leader for the next 5 years, doing nothing, sleeping. We've seen them dozing in parliament. We've seen sessions. There are those that don't say anything. Those are the leaders you voted. And you find the next elections, they revote them back. Drop them. Drop those who are not doing anything. Vote wisely. That's what I would tell them.
All right. That's all we have from our panelists here at the Equilibrium. And we will have you next week again on this same show. But for now, what you have to do is to keep on watching us. And ideally, this is what we do every week, trying to help you understand the economy, trying to help you understand such and more topics. The politics of this country, the political environment of this country. What does your vote mean? What does that 10,000 you're given, or that sachet of salt you're given, what does it mean in the long run? What does it mean to your well-being? What does it mean to your children, to your generations? I hope you got all those answers right here on the Equilibrium, and we shall be back. My name is Dana Evale, and before I leave my panelists, I'd like to remind you that it is Darius Mugabe who is who said we don't need elections. No, we want to go there. Let it bite you. We have Darius Mugabe. He says no election whatsoever. We don't need it. We put announcements in newspapers, and then people make bids. Yes, yes, and he's a lecturer at Makerere University Business School. The lady, yes, in yellow, I had a dig at her about NRM. Yeah, she's called CEO, yes, Hope Manzi. Yes, if you want a cake, she's your woman. He does very nice cakes. Yes, an economist at Yield Africa, right here. And to the extreme right there is Francis Muhile, who is a CEO, by the way, of the Neo-Econometric, right? And also a lecturer at Makerere University Business School. For now, the bumps, as we say, bye. Okay. Thank you, guys.